Welcome to Podcasting Smarter, the podcast for and by podcasters. We interview podcasters for the real scoop on podcasting. Whether you're thinking about starting a podcast or have been podcasting for years, you'll find lots of inspiration, valuable lessons, and tips in our interviews. This podcast is brought to you by Podbean. Please visit podbean.com, the home for podcasters.
We're sitting here at Podcast Smarter with Josh from Our Americana and from True Crime Bullshit. How you doing today?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Doing good. Again, thanks for making the time to sit down with us, talk a little bit about your podcast and a few different things here. I want to thank you again for making the time. I want to thank you for, number one, doing such great work with your network here. It looks like you've got about 4 different podcasts under it. Before we begin and really get into a lot of the meat, we'd love to tell our listeners a little bit about what you've done, what your podcasts are about, how you got to where you are. Please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so I have 4 podcasts, and I'm redesigning my website currently, and it really struck me in the design of the website what the through line is after 3 years of doing this, which is American geography. So the first show is Our Americana, which focuses on community in small town America. Each episode centers on a different small town where a unique event or circumstance has impacted or cultivated community there. The second show is True Crime Bullshit, which is a serialized true crime story which looks at serial killer Israel Keys, but also kind of deconstructs the genre of true crime and how it affects listeners and people within the true crime community. And then the Karen and Ellen Letters is a collection of found letters from the 80s between a landlord and his 2 very dim and demanding tenants. So that podcast has actors reading these 3 years worth of correspondence and is narrated by me kind of going out into the world trying to authenticate these letters because they get just incredibly egregious and really wild and unbelievable at certain points. And the fourth is Playlist, which is a music podcast where I bring in a different panel of podcasters and comedians or good friends each week. We pick a theme and we each present 2 songs to fall within that theme and talk about what they mean to us and generally give each other crap. You know, every now and again someone shows up with like a Justin Bieber song and we have to roast them. So those are the 4 shows.
Awesome. A question for you then, and I'm sure it'll be a little bit of a hard question. Do you have a favorite podcast on your network more than others, or are they all kind of your children?
They are all my children, but I do have favorites, which I think is probably the truth with parents as well. So Our Americana just means the world to me because I think it is touching on really important issues in a non-political way. And I think it forces people to really challenge the way they see the world. And True Crime Bullshit is my other favorite just because, again, it's a really challenging show. I think it kind of forces us to look at the way that we consume true crime, the way we relate to it, the way we bring it out into the world with us. And it's just a lot of fun. There's so much research. Israel Keys was a very meticulous, enigmatic serial killer. And there's just layers upon layers in uncovering his crimes and sharing his story. So I think those 2 really I get the most out of.
And True Crime Bullshit seems to be doing very well. I believe I see about 21 episodes here, and you guys are about 1 million downloads on it now.
Yeah, so there's 19 actual episodes. I did a promo and then a Q&A, and yeah, I think I'm at 1.1 million now in 6 months, which is wild. It really has gone way beyond my expectations, and every day where I find new listeners is just a total gift. So it's been really humbling and exciting.
I know that there's so much in-depth stuff with True Crime Bullshit. Can you tell us like what the research was like for that one? What was your process? What is your process?
It's been over 3 years of research. I started podcasting with Our Americana in early 2016. And as soon as I was like, oh, this is a medium that I really enjoy as a writer and as a storyteller, I immediately started thinking of other shows I would like to do. And True Crime Bullshit was the second that came to mind just because I was so fascinated with Israel Keys and the story of him. And I think it's a unique story because it's kind of true crime in reverse. I think we're used to a victim and a crime and then looking for a killer. And here it's, we have a killer, but we don't know who his victims were. And he had this crazy deal with the FBI where they were not going to release his name to the press, and as long as he was cooperating with them. So it kind of already as a story spun the true crime genre on its head a bit. So I immediately started just devouring everything I could about Israel Keys, which because of this deal, there wasn't a lot. Then I filed a FOIA, and that took a really long time and cost a small fortune. And when those records came from the FBI, it was over 2,000 pages. So I was going through that, and then anytime I thought that there might have been a victim of his, I would FOIA that missing person case. And so I'd have to wait for those files, and they'd come, and they'd be anywhere between like 30 and 300 pages. So it was going through all this, creating a timeline, and then just looking into missing people who disappeared wherever he happened to be, because he would travel across the country, and he was really good at like not leaving a footprint. So he would pay in cash, or he would like fly to Chicago and then rent a car and drive 1,000 miles. So he was really hard to track, and you'd kind of have to like do cell phone pings, and I had to get an expert to help me understand that, because that was a whole different world, and had to get experts to help me understand like tide charts. So there was a ton of research, a lot of expert interviews, and research, and it's still to this day, you know, I'm in between seasons 1 and 2 now, and just the research is never ending. I'm filing FOIAs every single day, and yeah, it's an animal.
It's amazing how much research you put into it too. Like you said, this is a project that over 3 years took so much research, and even diving back into his like backlog, his back history, into files that, from the way you make it sound, may have been at one point like classified to a degree. And it's real interesting to see that there's still so much in like the crime world that's still so under wraps, especially about someone that has such a profile like this.
Yeah, and I don't think that he or the circumstances around his arrest and interrogation are unique. I think, you know, for everything we think we know, there's, you know, probably 1,000 things we don't know in terms of crimes and killers, and this has been really eye-opening for me, just seeing how the FBI handled this. And, you know, some people feel like they didn't handle it well. I think they did the best they could, and I think the deal they struck worked up into a certain point. And so I imagine that they've used it as kind of a template when working with other serial killers who they've apprehended.
Sure. And now we're talking about how much of foot traffic this true crime bullshit has gotten recently. What has been some of the ideas that you and your team have done to promote the podcast? I know a big thing for a lot of people on our channel, outside of our channel, in and out of Podbean, is how do I get my message and my podcast into the hands of people that want to listen to it? Was there a lot of strategy behind let's get true crime bullshit and our Americana's network out to the masses, or what was some of your strategy behind that?
Well, my team is just me, so a lot of the strategy was panic and desperation.
That's a mood.
Yeah, and you know what's funny is my career prior to podcasting was branding, marketing, and PR, and yet when I came upon my own projects, I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. So I think with this, I was able to leverage pre-existing relationships. This is my 4th show. So when I launched this, I had been podcasting 3 years already. And so I developed a lot of relationships, particularly within true crime, just because that's, you know, the saturated market right now. So I leveraged that. I started really amplifying press, which I hadn't done previously just because I didn't have the bandwidth for it. But with this, I just, like, Our Americana was a whim. It was something I was doing just to kind of like satisfy myself. And then it took off, and I was like, oh, this is great. With true crime bullshit, I had put so much work and money into it that I just could not let it fail. So I had to be as proactive as possible. So I was sending out press releases on like a weekly basis. I was begging friends to air promos on their true crime shows. I did Facebook ads, which I will say, and I've heard this mirrored from most of my independent podcast friends, are not a great value. So it's just a lot of grassroots, just begging people to listen to my show, to promote my show, to pay attention to my show, and just making sure I was getting my name out everywhere I could. So Facebook, Twitter, magazines, print, blogs, going to conventions. Like before I even launched, which was a gift that I had been working on this for so long, is I knew it was coming. So I was going to conventions 3-6 months before it even launched, like getting the name out there so people were aware and people were excited and people could get onto Facebook. And as soon as that first episode was out, I already had an active audience, which is probably the smartest thing I did in terms of promoting this.
I think one of the things that you touched on also was how grassroots it was. And even though you're using, big corporate names like Facebook, Instagram, like those kinds of social medias, you have a big marketing background. This was you who really put the boots to the ground and made a lot of effort to get this podcast into the hands of people that wanted to listen to it. I think a lot of the times that goes understated, how even though you do have a podcast and you have people listening to it and you have, it's up on a website or it's up on Podbean or it's up on Apple Podcasts, how do you get it out there? I think with this and what you just said, you highlighted basically the process for how anybody can really spread the message of what they want, regardless of the topic.
Yeah, and I will say, and I think it's something that's often overlooked, is podcasting is a community industry. And this is something I learned in PR that I'm so grateful for, is like everyone whose path you cross in 3 years may have an impact on your path and your journey. And I look back to 3 years ago when I started this, and some of my dear friends now who have huge shows like Wine and Crime and Impact Statement and oh gosh, now I can't think of any of them, but who were really, really small 3 years ago, who I became friends with, not because it was advantageous, but just because this was a community and we were all kind of helping each other grow and learn and understand this wild, wild west industry. And I've nurtured those relationships, not strategically, but just because they formed organically and I love them. And now they're huge podcasts and they were able to really help me. So I think exploiting and also really entrenching yourself in the community that is podcasting is the best strategic advice I could give to anyone who's starting a new show.
That's awesome. Now I got a question too. As a bit of an audiophile myself, I'm always interested to hear how different podcasters' recording process looks like, from some of the gear that you use to kind of shaping the, let's say making the shape of your podcast. Do you have a certain process that you use? Do you kind of follow like formula in terms of, okay, I'll do an intro here, then I'll talk about this? What is your kind of setup from both a technical and format perspective?
Well, I'll start with technical because that's where I'm probably the most moronic. I came into this having no tech experience whatsoever. So I kind of just made it up as I went along, and I'd buy a mic and then it would be awful. So I'd buy a new mic as soon as I could afford to. So it's been growing. I started out literally recording under my dining room table with blankets around it. It was like a blanket fort. And then I got a little more money, so I was able to upgrade to a bigger blanket fort in my bedroom. And now I'm in my closet with foam, and I have, a Blue Yeti microphone and a sound cage, and it's still very, very simple. And I'm hoping as the show starts to make more money, we can invest in like a proper sound booth or something. But it's very simple, and I think that's the other advice I would give. Is I see a lot of people starting shows who are on Facebook, like, what equipment should I get? How much should I spend? And they're talking about spending thousands of dollars. And I would like to think fairly successful show that equipment wise, I've only invested probably like $200 over the course of 3 years. So you don't need the top-notch equipment. You just need something that's going to sound good, and really just you should be worrying about your storytelling and what your brand is and what your vision is, because that's what people are going to latch onto. It's not crystal clear quality or sound effects or anything like that. And then in terms of format, I debated a lot with this, and I think that it created a lot of procrastination because, again, like I'd invested so much time into this show that I wanted it to be perfect. So what really, for me, it became about doing something immediately that was going to pull the listener in and give them an idea of what the episode was going to represent or be, or what their journey for that hour was going to be. So I open each episode with a soundbite from Interrogations with Keys that are relevant to the material we'll be covering. And then I go into just a very brief intro song, which is overlaid with, a very brief intro for me about the show. And then for me, it was about a narration that was not just about the crime and about Israel Keys, but about a holistic look, how it affected me. I think true crime is such a fascinating genre, and we're only really at the tip of it. I hear a lot of shows where it becomes very formulaic, and it's like crime, victim, investigation, criminal. And they're not really talking about the reverberations of these crimes. So that was a huge part to me. It's like, what happened to Key's family when he was arrested? What happened to his family when he finally admitted to all these crimes? What is in the case files that have nothing to do with this case? Like, there's this interconnectivity amongst true crime that I don't think a lot of people think about. I have these 2,000 files from the FBI, and they mention every major case you could possibly think of. Most of them are not related, but there is this interconnectivity, whether it's citing investigations that happened in other cases or tip lines where they think, oh, perhaps, Maura Murray was involved because she just vanished and most of Key's victims just vanished, or like lots of suicides where parents just can't accept that their children committed suicide. So they would rather hope that they were abducted by some crazy serial killer. So there was this fascinating interconnectivity, and I wanted to present that as well as the story of Israel Keys himself. And so in doing that, it's my narration, it's clips from his interviews. I interviewed one of the FBI agents who worked on the case. I interviewed a criminal psychologist just to get expertise and expert opinions. And so I weave all those together. In the early episodes, I interviewed true crime fans and true crime podcasters because I was really fascinated on how true crime impacts their lives and what their journeys were. And people did not respond well to that. So after, I think, episode 3, we stopped doing that. But I really just wanted to give a holistic view, and that meant nuanced versions of everything. So here's me telling the story, here's Keys telling his story, here's the investigator telling his story, here's how it affected all of us. And I just never relying too much on one of those vehicles. So like, if I'm doing 5 minutes of clips with Keys, then I have to do 10 minutes of narration from me, and I have to do 5 minutes of interview with an expert. So just making sure that I was never getting too stuck on one trope or one vehicle.
It sounds like, if you're watching a true crime show at the end of the season, they know who the bad guy is, they know what happened, but you're always thinking about, oh, well, what happened to this cop? What happened to this person? And you're always trying to make those extra connections to kind of expand the story.
Yeah, well, empathy was really important to me in all of this, and humanizing people. Because I think we have this really severe dissonance where we talk about serial killers as having mental illnesses, but then we don't have the empathy for them for having those mental illnesses, which is obviously a very challenging and hard pill to swallow. But I think if we're being honest with ourselves, we need to give them that space. And like, that doesn't mean what they did is okay or forgivable, but it also means like they didn't necessarily have control over their actions. And I am by no means a criminal psychologist, but I've talked to a few and they've kind of mirrored those thoughts. And I wanted to put that out there and also to humanize him, because while to us he's a monster, he had a kid and girlfriends and family members and great deep friendships. And by making him a monster, we're not humanizing those people and the experiences they had with him. And I think that's so critical in creating empathy for other criminals' families. And, we see a lot of stuff like, oh, his wife should have known, she's just as bad as he is. And it's like, no, like, your husband could be killing people and you'd never know because you love him. And we all kind of expect the best from the people in our lives. So that was really important to me. And what happened to his family after his arrest is just one of the most heartbreaking stories I've ever heard. And that to me became kind of the through line for this whole story, which is like, this is not just about the killer and his victims. Like, it is equally as important, but it's more than just that beat of like crime, victim, criminal.
Right. And I love the amount of detail that you've gone into this. I do want to change gears a little bit towards a little bit of a service that Podbean started to offer within the last year or so called PodAds. Basically, the ability for you to, or one of the things that we do to help you monetize your podcast. Not just you, but any podcaster who has the ability to use PodAds on their various podcasts. Have you gotten the opportunity to use PodAds? And if you have, tell us a little bit about how that's worked out for you, how you've been able to utilize that across True Crime Bullshit and the various podcasts in your network.
I have, and I love them. I think for me, the biggest impact, well, there's two, but because I'm one person and I can only do so much, especially producing 4 shows, is a lot of what I have to rely on is kind of a set it and forget it. Like, do as much as I can up front so that, you know, whatever is happening will pay off on its own. And I think PodAds has been phenomenal for that, because I get offers to do ad insertion to old episodes. And so I just kind of am like doing my own thing, and I'll get a notification saying, you know, someone wants to place an ad for episodes 13 through 17. And it's like, awesome. And all I have to do is click a button, and there's a new monetization tool that I have done very little work to implement. And then the money just shows up, and it's a dream, because it's, you know, podcasting, even where I'm at, is not a super well-paying job. And we kind of need to do everything we can to make money. So it's like Patreon and merch and ads. And so when the ads just kind of like happen on their own and pay for themselves, it's such a gift. And PodAds is unique in that. I have not come across that anywhere else, where I just get a notification and then don't have to do any work. Second to that, I also use another ad placement company, and I can integrate those ads through PodAds through their dynamic insertion. So again, it's like another place for me to monetize my show, but I can run it through PodAds, so it's less work for me, and it's still kind of that set it and forget it, because I can limit how long they run, and they just disappear on their own, and I don't have to do any work like editing out ads from, you know, an episode, or going back to the episode and removing the ad through the platform. Like, just everything is automated, and it's such a gift when you have so little time and you're trying your best to like make as much money in as many ways as possible.
I like that. And again, the highlight that you brought up too is a matter of it's a time saver. You know, you're talking about the litany of things that you have to do in and outside of the podcast, you know, in terms of getting all this research, and I'm sure things outside of just the podcasting world also. And just to be able to take an audio file and take these sponsorships that you've brought to the podcast platform, let's say, and just have them insert into things that you might not have even touched for months. I think that's a value that can't be understated. Who are some of the sponsors that you have currently through PodAds, or for your podcast, let's say?
So my biggest one, so through PodAds, it's been a lot of one-offs, which again is a gift. And like, this is going to sound bad, but it actually is, I think, really indicative of how seamless the system is. I can't even remember who those one-offs are, because the work on my end has been so minimal. Like, they just pop up in the show and then disappear. And I'm like, awesome, that was $50 I just made, and I don't even know from who. So it's irresponsible, but it's a great gift of irresponsibility. And then some of my bigger sponsors are Care of and Green Chef, who I've gotten through the other placement service, but I run all those through PodAds as well. So again, it's that like you can leverage money as many ways as possible, and PodAds does not discriminate that you're out there like hustling through other places as well, which I love, because a lot of other services are like, no, we're only running ads that we have placed with you. And so I appreciate that PodAds gets that this is a hustle game, and they work with you to help you hustle.
Absolutely. Do you find that you're doing a lot more of inserting pre-recorded company ads, or are you doing more host-read ads in your podcast?
I'm doing a lot more host-read, and I think that's just because of where I'm at with my numbers. You know, my other shows are a lot smaller, and so those it's more in pre-recorded insertion. But I think because I've reached that 30,000, that magical 30,000 downloads per episode threshold with True Crime Bullshit, I'm in the golden zone of pre-record or of host ads.
And I think a lot of podcasting advertisers like the host read a little bit more because, can they go and make an advertisement? Absolutely. But the thing is, it feels more genuine when you have the person who's actually part of the show giving their opinion on it and being able to really explain it in their own words.
Yeah, well, and what we do, and people take it for granted, is so intimate. We're in people's ears an hour a day, hour a week, sometimes many hours in a week, while they're alone, while they're working, while they're doing chores, while they're in their commutes. And so it does create a level of intimacy that I think advertisers really should be exploiting. And I'm surprised at this point that the market hasn't oversaturated. It seems like there's probably 20 companies that are really relying on that brand loyalty and intimacy by doing the host read ads. And then as a producer, they're a lot better because you don't really know what you're getting with some of these pre-recorded ads, and it can really break up the tone of the show. So I get a little anxious sometimes if I'm not familiar with the advertiser, because I'm like, oh man, is this going to be like some really cheesy, like used car commercial that's going to have like really bad sound effects and really loud music and like this like, we all speak in dulcet tones. Is it going to be like some rough like Gilbert Gottfried like screaming into a microphone? So yeah, like the host read ads really are the way to go for everybody because it does create that brand loyalty, and it does give the host kind of more control over the sound of their overall production.
Now, do you think that when you talk to sponsors that, like, let's say they send you an advertisement that they've already maximized and they've already created in a recording environment, but you say, hey, look, I want to do a host read one. Are they usually a little bit more open to giving you a script and letting you do your own thing with it? Or are they more like, look, you have to use ours? Like, is it a little bit more brand message?
What's really funny is I've only done it twice, and both companies were like, oh, I never even thought of that, which is wild to me because I feel like that is what we associate podcast advertising as host read. And I was like, oh yeah, like I will do it, and my listeners know my voice and they know me, and I think it'll be a lot more effective for you and better production for me. And we work with each other. It's like, send me the notes you want to hit and I'll hit them. And if you would like, I can send you the script that I've written and you can approve it or edit it. And it becomes a lot more collaborative. And I think that once you kind of open that door for them, they realize the benefit to doing host read ads.
Now, I got a question for you regarding ascertaining sponsors. Now, do you have any tips for gaining sponsors? I know that you said you're using PodAds and using also another service, but do you ever send out any sorts of requests for sponsorships, like via email with press kits? Do you have a mode that you go down to acquire them?
Yeah, so again, like I said, it's a hustle game. I do everything. So I, on my website, have ad sheets. So if people want to seek me out, they have all the information they need right there on the website and can contact me. I use PodAds. I use AdvertiseCast as the other company. I also, what's really important to me, especially because of the intimacy and because I really do respect and am humbled by the listeners, is making sure I'm selling products that actually matter to me, that I think will matter to my listeners. So I will seek out companies if I think that it's a good fit and it's a company I believe in. Like I'm currently, this is kind of hilarious. We have a bidet that we got from a startup that we love, and I was like, oh, I need to reach out to them because I like am talking about this bidet like out at happy hour with friends. I might as well be like talking about it on the show. So, it's everything. It's, like I said, you need to get your money where you can, and unfortunately one avenue is not going to pay your bills. So I am out there reaching out to companies that I believe in. I'm doing ad placement, I'm doing pod ads, I'm letting people come to me, and it's really I have gotten ads placed through each and every one of those avenues.
It's so interesting too, talking about like you said, it's a bidet. It's something that most people wouldn't consider as let's say a means of monetization through a podcast. But anything, if it's something that fits your MO or something you're really interested in, or this specific one, there's so many ways to maximize that content. Yeah.
Well, and startups are so forward thinking, and they really they're the best companies to go after because they want to get into this market because they know this industry is growing rapidly. They know that they can get a lot of bang for their buck. They know there's more brand loyalty in podcasting than any other medium. So startups are the way to go. I'm working with another one right now, which is like a locally sourced coffee company that just like ships you coffee every week that I love. And I reached out to them because I genuinely love their product. So yeah.
Are you a coffee fiend also?
I am drinking my third cup of the day currently.
There we go.
Y'all are the worst. Tea's where it's at.
Tea is so empty. It's empty.
I feel like here in New York and New Jersey, like in my area here, coffee is like the go-to for basically everything in the morning. Like there's the whole like, don't talk to me till I have my coffee. I feel like that originated here in the Northeast.
Yeah, I mean, well, so what's funny is I used to live in Seattle, which is, quote unquote coffee capital of the world. But here in Brooklyn, like I can swing a dead cat and hit like 5 coffee shops just in my front yard. So they're everywhere and they are always full. I went to go work in one the other day because my boyfriend was driving me crazy. And I couldn't get a table at any of these like 10 coffee shops within 3 blocks of my apartment because it's like a lifeblood here.
And that's why y'all are like that, because I'm in Nebraska and I'm drinking tea, so.
That's probably why we're so aggressive and uptight.
I can see that.
And the driving is crazy.
Oh,
what is well, let me ask you this then, a little bit off topic podcast. Top 3 coffee companies, who are your top 3?
So Depot 6, which is a company out of the Berkshires, where I actually just returned. I went up there for a little writing retreat to work on the podcast, which was a heaven, but there's a company there called Depot 6, which is phenomenal. And then, oh gosh, I can't think. The one that it's actually my favorite coffee that I got through this company trade, and I can't think of the name of it now. It's something similar to Depot. They all have like weird names now. So that one, I'll have to like email you later. And then when I was in the Berkshires, I also found this maple infused coffee, which is phenomenal. It's super sweet though, so it's kind of like once a week you have it as a treat. But those are my 3 favorites.
That's awesome. And are you ever like a Lavazza guy too, or no?
Pardon?
Are you ever finding yourself drinking any sorts of Lavazza, or is that a little bit too like ShopRite-y?
I don't even know what that is.
I got to get some of that to you. You'll love that. That's really good.
You say, I don't even know what that is. John, what are you drinking?
It's a good coffee, and they've got a bunch of different styles, but they're great. Before we conclude the interview here, I'd love to give you the floor to give people a little bit more insight as to where they can find you. Obviously, you've got a huge foot traffic, and we can't appreciate enough that you've made the time to chat with us today. But we'd love to give you the floor to let people know where they can find you, and the floor is yours. Yeah,
so I'm currently updating the website. The old one is still easy to navigate. It's just not as updated, but our-americana.com. You can reach all 4 podcasts from there. And then all 4 podcasts have their own identities across all social media. So I have Facebook groups for all 4 of them. I have Twitters for all 4 of them. I have Instagrams for Karen and Ellen, Our Americana, and True Crime Bullshit. I'm basically omnipresent. Just Google Josh Hallmark and you'll find whatever you need. But yeah, Our-Americana is your one-stop shop.
Awesome. Josh, again, thank you so much for making the time. And again, we look forward to seeing all of the fruits of the labor that you've been putting out. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you. This was wonderful.
Thanks for joining us for Podcasting Smarter. You can check our show notes at podcast.podbean.com for links and details. Please like our podcast, leave your comments, and help us spread the word to other podcasters so we can bring you more great episodes with podcasting tips and inspiration from fellow podcasters. If you want to connect with other podcasters or get interviewed on this podcast, please join our Podcasting Smarter Facebook group. We look forward to welcoming you to the community. Happy podcasting!